She only wanted to serve coffee and make it through another long shift. But that night, when a millionaire walked in, her dignity became a game, and her intelligence a joke. He waved a $100,000 offer like it was a toy, daring her to serve him in Chinese. The room fell silent, eyes on the black waitress who'd been underestimated all her life. No one expected what came next, because when she opened her mouth, she didn't just speak, she shattered every stereotype in the room. What happens when the one you look down on rises higher than you ever could? It was a Tuesday morning like any other at the downtown cafe, a quiet rhythm of clinking cups, espresso steam, and morning chatter. Amara moved gracefully through it all, her motions practiced, her smile genuine. To most customers, she was just the waitress who never forgot an order and always remembered who liked extra sugar. But behind that calm exterior was a woman who had worked twice as hard for half the recognition. Every morning, she tied her apron and reminded herself why she endured it. The tips she sent to her younger brother in college, the rent due at the end of the week, the quiet pride of standing on her own. Life hadn't been easy, but she'd built something stable in a world that often tried to make her feel small. Still, there were moments, brief, sharp flashes, when she felt the weight of how people looked at her. The tight smiles, the lingering glances that said, "You don't belong here." She learned to shrug them off, to bury the sting beneath professionalism. After all, she wasn't just serving coffee. She was serving dreams, ambition, and the hope that hard work might one day be enough. That morning, the cafe buzzed with its usual crowd of business types and tourists. Amara wiped down the counter, listening to snippets of conversation, talks of investments, new ventures, success stories she'd never been invited to tell. She once dreamed of being on the other side of that counter, a linguist or interpreter, maybe even a diplomat. Languages fascinated her, the way words could bridge worlds. Over the years, she'd studied in secret, mastering not one but several. Each new language felt like reclaiming a piece of herself that society had tried to silence. But to her coworkers, she was simply the reliable one. To customers, the quiet one. Nobody saw the woman who stayed up late whispering Mandarin tones into the mirror or practicing French while the city slept. Her brilliance was invisible beneath the uniform. Outside, dark clouds gathered, a subtle warning that something was about to change. Around noon, a black car pulled up, sleek and silent. Its door opened, and out stepped a man who carried his arrogance like a tailored suit. The regulars whispered. Everyone knew his face, the tech millionaire with a reputation for testing people just to prove he could. Amara didn't notice him at first. She was too focused on clearing a table. But when his voice cut through the hum of the cafe, low and demanding, she felt something shift in the air. The tone wasn't just entitled, it was the kind that stripped dignity from anyone who heard it. He took a seat by the window, glancing around as if the place itself weren't good enough for him. His watch gleamed brighter than the overhead lights. The staff exchanged uneasy looks. Customers pretended not to notice, but the tension had arrived like a shadow no one could ignore. When Amara approached his table, polite as always, he looked her up and down with a smirk that said more than words ever could. She'd seen that look before, the one that reduced her to a stereotype before she even spoke. She forced a smile, steadying herself. In that moment, something deep inside her stirred. A quiet intuition that this encounter would not be like the others. That behind his smile was a test, not of service, but of worth. And though she didn't know it yet, the next few minutes would not only challenge her patience, they would reveal the power she'd carried all along. The cafe that had been her safe space would soon become the stage for a moment the world would never forget. The man's voice carried through the cafe like a blade wrapped in silk, smooth, but cutting. "I'll give $100,000, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "if someone here can serve me in Chinese." A few people chuckled, thinking it was a joke. Others just looked away, uncomfortable. But there was something in his tone that made the laughter die quickly. He wasn't joking. His words weren't a challenge, they were a performance, one built to humiliate. Amara froze behind the counter, coffee pot in hand. Her coworkers exchanged uncertain glances, each silently praying he wouldn't single them out. But then his gaze found her, steady, sharp, and dripping with condescension. "You," he said, pointing. "You look like you could use the money." A ripple of silence spread through the cafe. Amara felt the burn of 100 invisible eyes. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from the heavy, familiar ache of being targeted. She'd faced racism before, but never like this, never so public, never with so much cruelty hiding behind a smile. She managed a polite response, her voice steady even as her hands trembled. But he interrupted, leaning back in his chair with mock surprise. "Oh, you do speak," he said, chuckling. "But let's see if you can handle something more sophisticated. Come on, impress me. Say something in Chinese." The room felt smaller now. Every sound, the hiss of the espresso machine, the shuffle of feet seemed to vanish. All that remained was the weight of humiliation pressing down on her. Amara's coworkers stood frozen, torn between wanting to step in and fearing the consequences. The manager, usually quick to defend his staff, stayed quiet. The millionaire was a regular, a man whose money made him untouchable. Amara's mind raced. She could walk away, pretend she hadn't heard, swallow the insult like so many before. But something in her refused. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the years of being underestimated, dismissed, overlooked. Or maybe it was simply time to stop being silent. She met his eyes, calm and unflinching. "Would you like your coffee first?" she asked softly. He smirked. "No, I want my entertainment first." A few gasps rippled through the cafe. The tension was unbearable now, stretching like a wire ready to snap. Amara took a slow breath, her mind flicking through memories. Late nights studying grammar charts, practicing tones until her throat ached, whispering words that once gave her a sense of freedom. She'd learned languages not to impress anyone, but to understand people, to break barriers. Yet here she was, being mocked for the very thing that made her extraordinary. The millionaire leaned forward, ready to enjoy the spectacle he'd created. Cameras were already out, phones tilted subtly, recording. The world, or at least this tiny corner of it, was watching. Amara opened her mouth, and for a moment no sound came. Her hands shook, but then, like a tide rising, confidence returned. She began to speak. At first it was soft, a greeting in flawless Mandarin. The pronunciation precise, the tone melodic. Then, without pause, she shifted into another language. French, then Spanish, then Italian. Each one flowing seamlessly into the next, her voice growing stronger, her words like a storm reclaiming power. The room went silent. The smirk vanished from his face, replaced by disbelief. He tried to laugh it off, but the laughter caught in his throat. And then she said something else, in his own native tongue. The color drained from his face. No one moved, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the espresso machine. Amara stood there, tall, calm, and unshaken. In less than a minute, she had dismantled every assumption he'd built about her. But before the applause, before the whispered praise that would soon fill the air, there was a single, suspended heartbeat of silence, where everyone realized what they had just witnessed. It wasn't just a woman speaking languages. It was a woman reclaiming her worth in a world that had tried to erase it. And though she didn't know it yet, that moment, captured on half a dozen cell phones, was about to ignite a fire far beyond the walls of that cafe. For a moment, the cafe was a vacuum. No sound, no motion, only the sharp, electric silence after Amara's words. The millionaire's smirk had melted into something hollow. His arrogance, once thick enough to fill the room, now hung limp in the air like smoke after a fire. But humiliation has a way of turning to anger in men who are never told no. He stood slowly, chair scraping against the floor, the sound slicing through the quiet. "You think you're clever," he said, his voice low and venomous. "You think speaking a few words makes you equal to me." The words stung, not because they were new, but because they were so painfully familiar. He was saying out loud what so many others had said in whispers. She saw the shift in his eyes, the look of someone desperate to reclaim control, to remind the room who was supposed to matter and who was not. He stepped closer, invading her space. Cameras caught every second, but that didn't stop him. "Say something else," he sneered. "Come on, since you're so talented." His voice dripped sarcasm, but beneath it was something uglier, a need to reassert power to make her small again. Amara didn't move. Every muscle in her body screamed to step back, to diffuse, to disappear, but she stayed still. Her breath came steady, her gaze unbroken. She had faced harder things than this man's fragile ego. The customers, silent witnesses, shifted in discomfort. Some looked down, pretending not to see. Others raised their phones higher. The tension had turned suffocating, pressing down like the heavy weight of history itself. It wasn't just about a cafe anymore. It was about every time someone like Amara had been told to know her place. Then the man made his final mistake. He reached for her wrist. It wasn't violent, just a grab meant to assert dominance, to show he could touch, control, intimidate. But in that instant, something inside Amara snapped. Not in rage, but in revelation. The years of silence, of smiling through humiliation, of enduring what others called small things, they all erupted into a single, unwavering truth. She pulled her hand back, firm and dignified. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, but it carried the weight of generations. "You don't get to decide my worth," she said. "Not with your money, not with your pride, not ever." The words landed like thunder. The millionaire froze, face paling as the crowd finally reacted, gasps, murmurs, a few voices whispering, "Good for her." Someone clapped, then another, and suddenly applause rippled through the cafe, building like a wave. He turned toward them, furious, but the moment was gone. The power had shifted completely. His wealth, his arrogance, his entitlement, all of it meant nothing against the dignity of a woman who refused to be belittled. He muttered something under his breath and stormed out, the door slamming behind him. But the echo of that door wasn't just his exit. It was a sound of something breaking open, something bigger than one man's ego. Amara stood frozen, chest rising and falling, the noise of the room blending into a blur. She didn't smile. She didn't bow. She just stood there, calm, steady, proud. But even as the applause swelled, a new kind of silence began to form beneath it. A deep, reflective quiet in the hearts of everyone watching. Because they hadn't just seen a confrontation. They had witnessed a moment that peeled back the polished surface of everyday life and showed something raw, uncomfortable, and true. And outside that cafe, beyond those glass windows, the world was already watching. The video, recorded, shared, spreading like wildfire, was on its way to becoming something no one could ignore. Amara had walked into work that morning just another face in the crowd. Now, her name was about to carry a message far louder than any insult could silence. What began as mockery had turned into a movement. But as the cameras flashed and strangers cheered, one haunting thought lingered in her mind. What happens when the world starts to listen, but only after it's too late? The video of that moment spread faster than wildfire. Within hours, millions had seen it. The millionaire's arrogance, Amara's quiet defiance, the way she stood tall while the world around her held its breath. It wasn't just a viral clip, it was a mirror. A reflection of how society so easily dismisses, humiliates, and stereotypes those who look a certain way or stand in a certain place. At first, Amara didn't even know she was trending. Her manager showed her the clip the next morning, his hands trembling slightly as he said, "You've become the voice of something bigger." She didn't feel like a hero. She hadn't meant to prove a point. She had only stood up for her dignity. But somehow, her refusal to bow had become a symbol of quiet power. Messages flooded in, some filled with praise, others with hate. People debated her online. Some called her inspirational. Others said she'd overreacted. But through all the noise, one truth echoed louder than everything else. The world had watched a Black woman refuse to be humiliated. And for so many who had lived through similar moments in silence, that was enough to stir something deep and raw. The millionaire released a statement days later, apologizing publicly. He said his words were taken out of context, but everyone had already seen the context for themselves. His reputation crumbled, but the conversation didn't stop there. It grew. People began sharing their own stories of mockery, discrimination, and subtle cruelty disguised as jokes. The comments section became a collective confession, a place where pain met truth. For Amara, life changed in quiet but profound ways. She was invited to speak on shows, to tell her story. But each time she stepped onto a stage, she reminded the audience that this wasn't about one man's mistake. It was about a system that allowed him to believe he could do it without consequence. She used her platform not for fame, but for awareness. She spoke about how stereotypes strip away humanity, how opportunity is still filtered by skin tone, accent, or name. And every time she spoke, she did it in one of the 9 languages she had mastered, turning the very thing that had been used to mock her into her greatest weapon of truth. The cafe where it all happened became something of a landmark for a while. People stopped by, took photos, posted hashtags. But for Amara, it was still just the place she'd once worked to make ends meet. When she passed by, she didn't see fame. She saw the moment she stopped apologizing for her existence. Yet, even with all the attention, she knew the battle wasn't over. For every camera that captured her defiance, there were thousands of unseen moments happening quietly, moments where someone else stayed silent because they were too afraid, too tired, or too alone to fight back. The real impact of her story wasn't in the millions of views. It was in the conversations it sparked at dinner tables, classrooms, and workplaces. It was in the questions people began asking themselves. How many times have I laughed at something that wasn't funny? How many times have I stayed quiet when I should have spoken up? Amara's story didn't end with her victory. It began there. Because courage doesn't live in viral clips. It lives in the everyday moments when someone chooses dignity over fear. She once believed that languages were her way of understanding the world. But now, she realized, they were her way of changing it. And as the video continued to circulate, as new faces watched it and whispered, "That could have been me," a quiet revolution grew from that cafe floor. A reminder that every act of disrespect, every subtle bias, every casual joke, carries the weight of history. Amara's story became more than a headline. It became a question that refused to fade. How many more people must prove their worth before the world stops doubting it?